The AFL isn't fair, and when St Kilda President Andrew Bassett pointed that out, he was met with a lot of criticism, particularly online, with this comment and heaps others being a perfect example. But is it really completely their own fault, like this commenter suggests, or is there something else at play? Something that nearly killed many clubs, caused prolonged droughts and prolonged dominance, and in a way nearly ended the whole league. This is the story of country zoning, and how it nearly killed Victorian football. The year is 1966. The Beatles are at their peak. England have just won the FIFA World Cup, and in the VFL world, St Kilda have just been crowned champions for the first time in their then 93-year history. And the VFL clearly took offence to that, introducing a new policy to equalise the league. This became known as the country zoning system, and each team was allocated a zone loosely based on their performance and stance in the game at that time. These zones were intended to be shared around each year to account for the fact that some regional areas produced more talent than others. But ultimately, Carlton and Hawthorn, who had benefited from their productive zones, had a tantrum and refused to share their zones. So the VFL, potentially fearing a breakaway similar to that of the breakaway from the VFA in 1896 that founded the VFL, gave in to their demands, and the zones were not changed for the entire length of the country zoning era. There were consequences to country zoning that the VFL didn't see coming, which led to arguably the most dominant era in VFL-AFL history, with 4 clubs winning all of the premierships between 1967 and 1983. The clubs being North Melbourne, who had the Owens and Murray Football League, Hawthorn with the Mornington Peninsula Football League and the West Gippsland Leagues, Carlton with the Bendigo Football League, and Richmond with the Sunraysia Football League. On the other side, the clubs with the worst zones struggled both on-field and financially, with South Melbourne moving to Sydney as a result of financial difficulties that would have been in some part due to their on-field performances as a result of lesser access to players. St Kilda's return from somewhat powerhouse from the mid-60s to early 70s to being almost constantly at the bottom or close to it is more likely than not as a result of country zoning and their lesser access to players that nearly killed the club financially. By the early 1980s, cracks had begun to show in the country zoning system, particularly the fact that multiple players began to resent the zoning rules, including the notable case of Silvio Fascini, who refused to move up to Sydney when the Swans did, opting to stay in Melbourne, but was refused clearance from the league to join St Kilda. Silvio declared that the zoning system was an illegal labour market. The system was abolished in 1986 and replaced with what we still use today, the draft, which has proven to be a much fairer and equal way of dispersing talent amongst the 18 teams in the league today. That brings us to the end of the history of the zoning system, but can its effects still be felt today? Well, yes, when you look at another AFL recruitment rule, the father-son rule, which directly benefits teams who have legends that have a long career in the game and go on to have children that are talented footballers as well, such as the case with the Dacos family. Their father, Peter Dake, was recruited to Collingwood under the zoning rule in the late 70s and went on to have a 250-game career and be inducted into the Hall of Fame. He would then go on to have 2 kids that would get picked up by Collingwood for practically nothing, with Josh being taken at pick 57 and Nick, one of the top prospects in the draft class, was picked up by Gold Coast, but then Collingwood matched the bid, meaning that he would become a Magpie. And he is rapidly rising through the ranks of the AFL, becoming one of the most popular players and having a historic 2024 season, polling the second most votes in a Brownlow in a season ever. In a season where he didn't win the medal. So that's the end of the video, and if you did enjoy, I would really appreciate it if you'd like the video and subscribe, as it really does help the channel out heaps.